To speak of the Yes concert at Queen's Park Rangers Loftus Road Stadium on May 10, 1975, is to engage with an act of magnificent, heroic, and ultimately beautiful folly. It was not merely a performance, it was a testament, a grand and hubristic declaration of faith from the high altar of progressive rock. It represented the absolute apogee of a certain kind of musical and theatrical ambition, a moment frozen in the amber of cultural history that contained both the dazzling brilliance of a supernova and the inexorable physics of its own collapse. To truly comprehend the significance of this single day in West London, one must first exhume the colossal and contradictory beast that was the progressive rock movement in its mid-1970s imperial phase. And within that, one must dissect the even more complex, fractious, and brilliant organism that was the band Yes at that specific, tumultuous juncture in its history. This was not a gig. It was a coronation and a wake, held simultaneously. It was a statement of intent, a declaration of what was deemed possible when sublime musical virtuosity, an almost childlike, unbound imagination, and a budget of pharaonic proportions collided under the open, and as it would turn out, characteristically fickle English skies. For a few fleeting hours, it was a glimpse of a utopia built of sound, light, and plywood, a fantasy world made manifest on a rectangle of grass usually reserved for the far more prosaic business of kicking a leather ball. And like all utopias, it was breathtaking, deeply, fundamentally flawed, and utterly, gloriously unsustainable. It was, in short, everything that made this era of music both essential and infuriating. The mid-1970s were a period of profound schizophrenia in the cultural landscape of popular music. The progressive rock movement, having gestated in the psychedelic underground of the late 1960s, had by now ascended to a position of seemingly unassailable dominance. Bands like Yes, Genesis, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and Pink Floyd were no longer just rock groups. They were corporate entities, institutions of formidable commercial and cultural power. They sold albums in quantities that beggared belief, filled arenas and stadiums across the globe, and commanded a level of artistic respect, or at the very least, a grudging critical acknowledgement of their seriousness. That was entirely unprecedented. This was music conceived on a grand scale. These bands crafted long, intricate, multi-part compositions, frequently drawing their structural and thematic inspiration from classical music, esoteric literature, Eastern philosophy, and science fiction. They pushed the very definition of what a rock band was supposed to be, what it was allowed to do. Their albums were not disposable commodities. They were events, meticulously packaged with fantastical gatefold artwork that was as integral to the experience as the vinyl grooves within. This was music that did not merely invite, but demanded to be taken seriously. It rewarded deep, repeated listening and a degree of intellectual engagement far beyond the 3-minute pop single. To its legions of devoted acolytes, this was the apotheosis of the rock art form, its highest evolutionary state. To its rapidly growing number of detractors, however, it was the bloated, self-indulgent epitome of everything that had gone wrong with the music industry. A gaudy, empty spectacle of meaningless virtuosity and half-baked, pretentious concepts that had severed all ties with the raw, primal, visceral energy that was the supposed birthright of rock and roll. It was, they argued, a gilded cage, beautiful to behold but empty of soul. It was into this febrile, divided cultural climate that Yes, arguably the most quintessentially prog of all the major bands, prepared to launch its most audacious and challenging tour. The band itself was in a precarious state of transition, a testament to the creative friction that had always been its engine. They were riding high on a sustained wave of phenomenal commercial success. The 1-2 punch of Fragile, 1971, and Close to the Edge, 1972, had cemented their status as progressive rock royalty, blending dazzling musicianship with moments of transcendent melodic beauty. But their previous studio effort, the sprawling, ambitious double LP Tales from Topographic Oceans, 1973, had proven to be a divisive masterpiece, a line in the sand for fans and critics alike. Inspired by a lengthy footnote in Paramahansa Yogananda's Autobiography of a Yogi, a fact that, in itself, tells you everything you need to know about the band's mindset at the time. It was an album of immense, almost daunting scope and complexity. It was a four-sided epic with one track per side that tested the patience and attention span of many critics and even some of the band's most loyal followers. More critically, it had fractured the delicate internal chemistry of the group. The prodigiously talented and famously flamboyant keyboardist Rick Wakeman, a man whose own solo albums were hardly models of ascetic restraint, found Tales to be a bridge too far into the territory of cerebral abstraction. He famously, and perhaps apocryphally, recounted stories of having a curry takeaway delivered and consumed on stage during the lengthy instrumental passages, a potent and very public symbol of his creative and spiritual disengagement. The musical journey had, for him, become a tedious slog. By May of 1974, he was gone, leaving a colossal, cape-shaped hole in the band's sonic architecture. The departure of a musician as central and iconic as Wakeman would have crippled, if not destroyed, a lesser band. But yes, perpetually driven by the unwavering, often mystifyingly optimistic vision of vocalist John Anderson, and anchored by the formidable, granite-like musical presence of bassist Chris Squire, was not a lesser band. For them, a crisis was simply another word for an opportunity. They needed a replacement, but it was clear that not just any keyboard player would suffice. They required a virtuoso of the highest order, a musician with the technical facility to navigate the labyrinthine, finger-twisting arrangements of their existing back catalog, but also, crucially, an artist with the creative spark to propel them into new, uncharted territory. Their search was indicative of their ambition. They auditioned several high-profile players, most notably the Greek electronic music pioneer Vangelis Papathanassiou. The prospect of Vangelis joining Yes is one of rock's great what-ifs. His atmospheric, synth-heavy style could have taken the band in a completely different, more ambient direction. Ultimately, however, his approach proved to be rhythmically incompatible with the band's aggressive, lockstep precision. The solution arrived in the form of a Swiss musician named Patrick Moraz, then a member of the trio Refugee. Moraz was a fundamentally different kind of player from Rick Wakeman. Where Wakeman's style was deeply rooted in the grand gestures of classical romanticism and a very English, almost music hall sensibility of showmanship, Moraz was a creature of a different musical climate. He was a more percussive, frenetic, and jazz-inflected player, his fingers dancing across the keys of his moogs and mellotrons, with a funky, unpredictable, and sometimes dangerous energy. He was less of a classical pianist and more of a sonic scientist, experimenting with textures and rhythms that felt alien to the Yes sound. He was precisely the catalyst, the irritant in the oyster, that the band needed to avoid stagnation. His arrival sparked an immediate and palpable creative fire. The new lineup, Anderson, Squire, Moraz, the uniquely inventive and chameleonic guitarist Steve Howe, and the powerhouse drummer Alan White, himself still relatively new to the band after replacing Bill Bruford in 1972, convened at Chris Squire's home in Surrey, which he had converted into a recording studio. The atmosphere was charged with a sense of renewal, of a point to prove. The result of these sessions was the album Relayer, released in November 1974. If Tales from Topographic Oceans was a journey into the mystical, the ethereal, and the serene, Relayer was a violent plunge into the chaotic, the dissonant, and the brutal. Its centerpiece, occupying the entirety of Side 1, was the 22-minute epic The Gates of Delirium. Inspired by Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace, it was a sonic depiction of a battle, a piece that moved from frantic metallic clashes of sound, featuring crashing sound effects made from old car parts, to a final, serene, and achingly beautiful closing section, Soon, which represented the calm and sorrow of the battlefield's aftermath. The Gates of Delirium was, and remains, one of the most demanding and audacious pieces of music ever recorded by a rock band. The other two tracks on the album, the hyper-caffeinated jazz rock workout Sound Chaser and the complex multi-layered ballad To Be Over, were equally challenging, showcasing Moraz's jazz fusion sensibilities and the band's breathtaking, almost terrifying technical prowess. Relayer was a dense, difficult, and often abrasive album, a stark and deliberate contrast to the more overtly melodic and accessible works that had preceded it. It was the sound of a band re-energized, pushing itself to the absolute limits of its capabilities, daring its audience to follow. With this new, aggressive, and uncompromising music in hand, Yes planned a tour that would be as audacious as the album that inspired it. The era of stadium rock was dawning, and for a band of Yes's stature, the traditional confines of concert halls and theaters were no longer sufficient to contain either their ambition or their ever-expanding audience. The Relayer Tour was conceived from the outset as a total sensory experience, a piece of mobile theater that would immerse the audience completely. The immense task of visualizing this new sonic world fell, as it had for all their most iconic albums, to the artist Roger Dean. Dean's otherworldly landscapes, his floating islands, fantastical creatures, and organic alien architecture had become as synonymous with the Yes aesthetic as Anderson's lyrics or Howe's guitar solos. His paintings were not mere decoration. They provided a visual grammar for the band's sonic explorations. For the Relayer Tour, Dean and his brother Martin designed a stage set that was arguably their most elaborate and astonishing creation to date. It was a biomechanical fantasy land, a three-dimensional realization of his album art. It featured giant, bone-like fiberglass structures that loomed over the band, and what appeared to be enormous barnacle-encrusted canopies that shielded the equipment. Alan White's massive drum kit was housed within a large articulated shell, often described by observers as a beetle or a crab, whose wings would open dramatically during key moments of the show, revealing the drummer within. The entire colossal construction was bathed in a sophisticated and revolutionary light show, which for the first time in the band's history prominently featured lasers. This technology, still in its infancy in the world of concert production, added another layer of futuristic spectacle to the proceedings. This was not just a backdrop for the music. It was a carefully constructed environment, an ambitious attempt to physically transport the audience from a mundane sports arena into the strange and beautiful world of Yes. The decision to cap the UK leg of this monumental tour with a massive one-off outdoor show at Loftus Road, the home of the Queen's Park Rangers Football Club, was both a logical conclusion to their imperial progress and a tremendous, almost foolhardy gamble. On one level, it was a supreme statement of their commercial dominance, a public demonstration that they could command an audience of over 30,000 people in their home country. But on another, it presented a host of logistical and technical nightmares. The acoustics of a large, open-air, three-sided football stadium are notoriously difficult to control, a particular and acute challenge for a band whose music relied so heavily on nuance, dynamic range, and crystal-clear separation between the 5 distinct instrumental voices. The weather in England in May is, to put it mildly, unpredictable. A downpour could wreak havoc on the complex electronics and dampen the spirits of the assembled multitude, and the sheer physical scale of the production, with its complex multi-part stage set and its cutting-edge temperamental lighting rig, meant that there was an enormous potential for technical failure in front of their largest ever UK headline audience. It was a high-wire act with no safety net. The day of the concert, Saturday, May 10, 1975, arrived with a palpable sense of occasion that was typical of the era's biggest rock events. This was not simply a concert. It was a festival-style gathering, a pilgrimage for the faithful. A strong undercard had been assembled to entertain the crowd throughout the afternoon. This included the eclectic folk rock band Griffin, whose intricate, quasi-medieval instrumentation and complex arrangements made them a fitting, if lesser-known, companion to the headliners. Also on the bill was the blue-eyed soul group Ace, who were then riding high on the international success of their classic single, How Long, providing a more conventional, melodic counterpoint to the day's progressive leanings. As the afternoon wore on, the stadium filled with a vast sea of denim and long hair, a tribal gathering of the progressive rock nation. The air was thick with anticipation and the smell of hot dogs and patchouli oil. The atmosphere was one of benign communal excitement, the collective sense that this was not just another Saturday afternoon, but a significant cultural event, a pilgrimage to the very heart of the progressive rock empire, to witness its high priests perform their most sacred rites. As dusk began to bleed into the London sky, the moment of truth arrived. The house lights dimmed, plunging the stadium into a moment of breathless anticipation. Then the familiar majestic strains of Igor Stravinsky's Firebird Suite, the band's traditional introductory music, echoed through the cavernous space, a Pavlovian signal that sent a shiver of excitement through the crowd. A moment of pregnant silence followed, which was then utterly shattered by Alan White's explosive, machine gun drum intro to Sound Chaser. The effect was electric, a sudden brutal shock to the system. Here was the new, revitalized Yes in all its aggressive, angular, and unapologetic glory. But almost immediately, the problems that had haunted the pre-production became a stark reality. The sound, as many had feared, was a swirling, cavernous, and often incoherent mess. Eyewitness accounts from the night, and the numerous bootleg recordings that have since surfaced, tell a consistent story of a frustrating and ongoing struggle for sonic clarity. The intricate, high-speed interplay between Steve Howe's crystalline guitar lines and Patrick Moraz's complex keyboard textures was frequently lost in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the stadium, swallowed by the wind and the sheer size of the space. The thunderous, trebly punch of Chris Squire's signature Rickenbacker bass, the very engine room of the band's sound, was often reduced to a muddy, indistinct rumble, and John Anderson's distinctive, ethereal high tenor, the celestial voice at the very heart of the Yes sound, seemed to drift in and out of the mix, at times soaring above the fray, at others being completely submerged by the instrumental maelstrom. It was, for a significant portion of the show, a sound engineer's nightmare made real, a chaotic audio soup that did a profound disservice to the meticulous detail and architectural complexity of the music being performed. And yet, despite these significant sonic gremlins, the raw power and undeniable conviction of the performance were undeniable. The band, rode hone to a fine edge, and at the absolute peak of their instrumental abilities, played with a ferocious, almost desperate intensity. As if trying to conquer the hostile environment through sheer force of will, Sound Chaser was a baptism by fire, a dizzying, breathtaking display of speed and precision that served as a powerful opening statement. This was followed by Close to the Edge, a piece that had by this point become their defining anthem, their stairway to heaven. Even with the compromised sound, the sheer structural majesty of the piece shone through. Its dramatic dynamic shifts from the chaotic, birdsong-filled overture to the serene, church-like middle section, I Get Up, I Get Down, and the triumphant, organ-drenched finale, creating a powerful and enduring emotional arc. The new, challenging material from Relayer was given a full-blooded and dramatic airing. To Be Over provided a necessary moment of gentle, melodic beauty, its delicate textures a stark contrast to the surrounding sonic warfare. But it was The Gates of Delirium that served as the show's theatrical and musical centerpiece. As the band navigated the song's brutal, metallic, and deliberately dissonant battle section, the full power of the production was unleashed. The stage lights flashed and strobed in a chaotic frenzy. The newly acquired lasers cut brilliant green lines through the smoke-filled air, and Roger Dean's fantastical set was transformed into a war-torn, alien landscape. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated sensory overload, a stunning fusion of sound and vision, on an epic, almost overwhelming scale. The setlist for the evening was a carefully constructed journey through the band's recent, intensely creative history, a testament to their remarkable artistic output in the preceding 4 years. They wisely interspersed the grand epics with moments of intimacy and quiet reflection. An acoustic section featuring delicate renditions of Long Distance Runaround and John Anderson's solo piece, The Preacher, the Teacher, provided a welcome change of pace. Steve Howe's obligatory solo guitar showcase, Clap, incorrectly titled The Clap on his first solo album, a fleet-fingered ragtime piece, was a joyous and crowd-pleasing display of pure musicianship that connected with the audience on a direct, human level. The certified classics like And You and I, and their breakthrough hit Roundabout, were met with enormous roars of approval, the vast crowd singing along to every word, their collective voice momentarily solving the sound issues through sheer volume. Patrick Moraz, the new man, proved to be a captivating and dynamic stage presence, more than holding his own amidst the established giants. His solo spot was a whirlwind of influences, a dazzling display of virtuosity that veered wildly from classical pastiche to avant-garde jazz and funk grooves. He attacked his formidable bank of keyboards with a physical, almost athletic energy, his body language conveying the passion and complexity of his playing. It was abundantly clear to anyone who witnessed his performance that night that he was not merely a hired hand or a temporary replacement for Wakeman. He was a vital new voice within the band, a driving force behind their new, more aggressive sound. The concert was thankfully filmed, and portions of it were later broadcast on the BBC's highly respected music program, The Old Grey Whistle Test. This footage, which has circulated amongst collectors for decades in various bootleg forms before finally receiving an official sonically restored release, provides an invaluable historical document. It captures both the undeniable glory and the inherent folly of the entire enterprise. It shows a band of 5 musicians at the absolute zenith of their collective powers, playing music of staggering complexity with an almost telepathic connection. It also starkly reveals the inherent absurdity of the undertaking. 5 relatively small men, dwarfed by a colossal, fantastical stage set that looked as if it had landed from another planet, attempting to perform music of incredible subtlety and intricate detail to a vast crowd in a setting utterly unsuited for it. There is a tangible sense of struggle in the footage, a heroic battle being waged between the band's lofty artistic ambition and the stubborn, unyielding physical limitations of the environment. In the cold, analytical light of day, the Queen's Park Rangers concert cannot be honestly appraised as an unqualified triumph. The persistent sound problems were a significant and undeniable flaw, and many in attendance left with a lingering sense of frustration that the audio quality had failed to match the breathtaking visual spectacle. For the British music press, which was already beginning to sharpen its knives and turn against the perceived excesses and self-importance of progressive rock, the event was an easy and irresistible target. It was held up as the ultimate example of prog rock hubris, a monument to a style of music that had become dangerously grandiose, fatally detached from its audience, and lost in its own labyrinthine concepts. The cultural winds were changing direction with startling speed. In the smoky, sweat-drenched pubs and clubs of London, a new, far more visceral and confrontational form of rock music was taking shape. Punk was coming. The Sex Pistols were already forming, and their stripped-down, 3-chord anti-establishment fury would be a direct and savage reaction against everything that Yes and their peers had come to represent. In this wider historical context, the QPR concert can be viewed as the last great extravagant party of the old regime, a final, magnificent, and defiantly over-the-top display of pomp and circumstance before the guillotine of the new wave fell. The legacy of the QPR concert is therefore a rich, layered, and complex one. For the thousands of devoted fans who were there, it remains a cherished, almost mythic memory, a moment of profound communal experience on a massive scale. It was a validation of their faith, a day when their favorite band stood astride the world, or at least a football stadium in West London, and declared that anything was possible. It was, as one attendee later recalled, a distinct feeling that this was a pinnacle moment, that it couldn't possibly get any bigger or more spectacular than this for the genre of progressive rock. And in many crucial ways, it didn't. The Relayer Tour would continue its successful run across North America, but the band's volatile internal dynamics were already beginning to shift and fray. Patrick Moraz's tenure with Yes, so crucial to the sound of Relayer, would prove to be frustratingly short-lived. By the time the band reconvened to record their next album, Going for the One, in 1976, he was out, and in a surprising turn of events, Rick Wakeman was back in the fold. The band would go on to create more excellent music, but the specific fiery and volatile chemistry of the Relayer era lineup was a unique and fleeting phenomenon, captured for posterity on this one spectacular night. The era of the truly epic no-holds-barred concept album and the accompanying bank-breaking theatrical tour was drawing to a close, a victim of its own economic unsustainability and the swift, brutal shift in public taste. So how should we, from the vantage point of the 21st century, remember the Yes concert at Queen's Park Rangers in 1975? We should not remember it as a perfect concert, for it was anything but. It was messy, it was flawed, it was sonically compromised, and in many ways it was a beautiful exercise in glorious failure. But its enduring importance lies not in its perfection, but in the sheer, unbridled audacity of its ambition. It was a testament to the powerful, romantic idea that rock music could be more than just disposable entertainment, that it could aspire to the emotional depth and structural complexity of high art, that it could create entire, immersive worlds for its audience to inhabit for a few hours. It was a brave and perhaps deeply foolish attempt to bridge the immense gap between the intimate, controlled act of creating music in a studio and the chaotic, communal experience of a live performance on the grandest scale imaginable. It was a fearless celebration of virtuosity, of unrestrained imagination, and of the sheer, unadulterated joy of making a colossal, intricate, and beautiful noise. To listen to the restored recordings and watch the surviving footage from that day is to be transported back to a time when the possibilities of rock music felt truly limitless, when the only constraints were the outer reaches of the musicians' imaginations and the physical strength of the stage rigging. It is to witness a band reaching for the heavens, even if their grasp ultimately fell short. The concert at Loftus Road was a profoundly beautiful, chaotic, and in the final analysis, a very human endeavor. It was the sound of a fantastic dream being played out loud, a dream of a world where rock bands could be symphonic poets and humble football stadiums could be transformed, however briefly, into alien landscapes from a Roger Dean painting. It was a dream that, by its very nature, could not last. But for one chilly, memorable evening in May of 1975, it was, in its own flawed, magnificent, and unforgettable way, very, very real. It stands today as a monument, not just to the band Yes, but to an entire era of popular music, an era that dared to dream on the grandest possible scale, and in doing so left behind a legacy that continues to fascinate, inspire, and provoke decades later.